So, how would I describe my faith as part of my identity? Um, well, I'm a Christian, although I don't like that label very much. Um, I use it because I don't want to dissociate myself from the larger body of Jesus followers who can be from any number of churches and any number of church traditions. But I don't like the label because of all the baggage that comes with it. The preloaded assumptions people have about a white male in the southern U.S., in the Bible Belt, who identifies as Christian. They tend to think fundamentalist, conservative, Protestant. They think hypocrite, judgmental, gullible, conspiracy theorist, racist, bigot, ignorant. I've been all of those things. I still can be. Sometimes I can certainly still be ignorant at times. However, I don't find myself in that tradition anymore. I did grow up in it, though. My mom and my dad divorced when I was young. My mom was agnostic when I lived with her, but she had a lot of mental illnesses, and it made her emotionally unavailable for as long as I can remember, and physically unavailable from the time I was about 10. My dad, I saw him a couple times a month, and he was in a fundamentalist, conservative community, Protestant community. And even though he was available, only a few days out of each month, it was more than my mom. And being human, I craved acceptance. I mean, that's just a basic need of every human being, is unconditional acceptance. And anyone who knows anything about the fundamentalist, conservative, Protestant tradition knows that unconditional acceptance is not practiced. There is a tendency to conflate approval and acceptance. So in that community, you have to win approval. They have to approve of your thoughts and beliefs and behavior, which means they all, those things have to align with how the community thinks and believes and behaves. Otherwise, you're not accepted. And that was certainly true in my dad's house. And because I craved acceptance and he was the most available parent that I had, I embraced fundamentalist conservative teachings. And I did that in order to gain his acceptance, and it did not work. He and I are on better footing now, but it didn't work back then. And, being a part of that community actually did do a few things for me, some of them helpful, some of them not so much. But one of the really helpful things that it did was it instilled values in me, like compassion, kindness, patience, humility, generosity, forgiveness, self-control, self-sacrifice, nonviolence. All of those things are good, and I still hold those values. They weren't always practiced, but people aren't perfect, so can't expect it to always be practiced, even inside churches that teach it. But even when it was practiced, it was only directed at other people in the community and potential converts, people, that maybe you could bring into the fold. But those values are still reflected, though, in that community. We just don't see it. What we see, referring to people outside that community, what we see is the way this community fails to reflect those values, particularly in how they engage in U.S. politics. But they do hold these values, and they don't fail to reflect them all the time. They just fail to generalize it to everyone. However, one of the unhelpful things that I received from this community was an interpretive methodology, a way of understanding Christian scripture that just led to all these contradictions in the text, immediate contradictions. Page 1, trying to read this according to their interpretive methodology, which was basically read the Bible prayerfully, because the Bible was written by God, through human agents, but by God to you, 21st century American. And I found it really unhelpful because it led to immediate contradictions. In that tradition, you bring your questions to the elders, people who've been prayerfully reading the Bible as if it was written by God to them for longer than you have. And no surprise, they weren't particularly helpful. They didn't have good answers, and they found my questions frustrating. And they would often get flustered, and essentially I learned, you just don't ask those questions. So I ignored the contradictions for a number of years in favor of, trying to win approval so that I could gain their acceptance. In 2016, the presidential election, where Trump ran against Hillary, that really brought out the worst in the people in my community, and family members, and the values that they had instilled in me, and that I believed that they held as well, all of a sudden were abandoned. And it was scary at the time. The security that I had felt, when the people and the institutions that I was a part of could be relied upon because they held the same values as me, all of that was shaken, and those people and institutions weren't safe anymore. And again, I'm only reflecting on my own experience, so I'm not generalizing this to all fundamentalist conservative Protestant congregations, but it shook my world, because it created this divide between me and other peoples in the community, because I still held those values, and I didn't think that Trump reflected them. It wasn't safe to talk about. And then in 2018, thanks to the good advice of some good friends, I started seeing a therapist, and was, through that experience, was naming these unmet emotional needs in my childhood that were still going unmet. I was identifying traumatic experiences, and starting to accept myself and heal from those experiences. And I gained a confidence through that to start asking the hard questions that I had neglected in favor of winning approval and gaining acceptance. I still wanted their approval. I wanted to be accepted because that's basic human desire, but I was okay because I had learned to accept myself. I was okay if they didn't accept me. So it really did not sit well with people in that community. It just made working in that environment challenging. And so I left that tradition. And now I don't belong to any one tradition. I don't identify as Protestant or Catholic or Eastern Orthodox or any other tradition. I actually appreciate the contributions of all of those traditions. I've learned to appreciate the contributions of Catholic theologians and the contributions of the Eastern Orthodox Church, the way that they've preserved, both of those traditions have preserved church history and some of the earliest expressions of Christianity, because it's just been such an incredible resource as I've learned, sort of unlearned and relearned how to interpret the Bible, learn what it is, and how to try to understand it. And I'm still driven by those same values that that were instilled in me in those fundamentalist conservative circles. Only now I generalize those values to all people. It's not just people in my tradition that are worthy. I'm personally nurtured by that self-acceptance and that confidence that I gained to stand up for what I believe in, even when I'm rejected for it. And I'm guided in my professional pursuits by those values that were instilled in me, and a new understanding of the Christian scriptures that is informed by church history and an awareness of ancient Near Eastern culture. Coming to this last question is a challenge. This ethical dilemma. Is there an ethical conflict between my spiritual tradition and social work, or in my case, psychology? And for the most part, no. Social work shares, and psychology shares my values. However, society and even many church traditions, I think I diverge from them in one respect, in regards to human suffering. I'm still finding the words to talk about this, but hopefully I can get my point across. Society in general, and I mean parts of society anyway, and many church traditions see human suffering as the greatest evil, the worst possible thing that could happen is for human beings to suffer. And their primary goal is to reduce human suffering right now. And that is certainly the invitation of the Christian scriptures, is to put faith into practice and to reduce human suffering right now. But when I look at Jesus and how Jesus behaved in regards to human suffering, Jesus did so much to reduce the suffering of the people right where he was. He was feeding the hungry. He was embracing the rejected. He was healing the sick. And the promise of Scripture is that one day human suffering will end. But Jesus died before ending all human suffering. And so that creates this sort of tension for me as I try to figure out what Jesus' primary goal was. And as I've reflected on it, I think Jesus' primary goal was to make God's true nature known. God was known to the Israelites. They were invited by God, chosen by God, and invited to commune with God directly, to know God personally and intimately. And they were invited up Mount Sinai to meet God there with Moses, but they rejected the offer, and only Moses and a few elders went up. And as a result, the Israelites, God's chosen people, had to see God and know God through the imperfect lens of their leaders, their priests and their prophets and their kings. And that over time led to a deep misunderstanding of the true nature of God. So much so that when God arrived, embodied in Jesus, the perfect lens through which to see the mind and will of God, the thoughts, emotions, desires, and will of God, on display, Israel's religious leaders were unable to recognize him as their own God, and partnered with the Roman political machine, used Roman political infrastructure to have him killed. So the ethical challenge for me in my future career is, how do I foreground the primary goal of Jesus? I don't even know if I would use the word primary. How do I foreground the goal of making God's true nature known while giving equivalent energy to reducing human suffering right where I am? And the jury's still out on that one.